So my name is Boyd and I'm an addict. Hey everybody, and Chris.
Yeah, my name's Chris, I'm an addict.
I want to go ahead and tell you guys that there was a while back I looked up what the definition of history was. And it is an interpretation of past events told in a chronological manner. So tonight, what you're going to get is past events told mostly in a chronological manner, but the most important word in that particular definition is interpretation. And you are going to get Chris's and I's interpretation of the information that we researched and gave it to Chris. He made a PowerPoint, and so here we are. Now, some of the source documents that we used for this presentation came from members' archives. They were the World Lit Conference minutes, they were photographs, tape recordings. We were able to get the recordings of the first 3 World Lit conferences out of Bose archives, and we're able to digitize those and listen to them. Fellowship inputs and newsletters were another huge source of information. So we went through, we interviewed many members, members' talks of what, there was 2 history conferences that went on that Chris and I got information from those. We've gotten, NAS has been available to us for it. And then we've gotten, another one of our resources are these books, which are rich in history. My Years with NA by Bob Stone, The Story of the Basic Text by Bo S., Alone but Never Alone by Linda M., and A Matter of Principle, How the Narcotics Anonymous Story Came of Age by Anonymous. Okay, and I want to give you a little bit of context of what was going on during the 7 Rural Lit conferences that created our basic text. Please, please, please keep in memory that this is an unfunded project. It started in 1979, and at the time, the World Service Office, they just didn't have the money to fund a project such as this. So this, members funded it themselves. And that's a lot to keep in mind with this. You got to understand that the service structure was both new and very much evolving. Bo was only the very second World Lit chairperson to ever come about. The first one was a guy named Mark, and it was in 1977. So, or 78, excuse me. NA is actually starting to grow outside of California now. And you got to remember, there were very different forms of communication. There were newsletters, there was mail, and there was these things called landlines. And believe me, the landlines, you had to pay for long distance back then. So keep all that in mind.
Yeah, so within that context, a couple other questions that we often think about is, how does literature impact the culture and growth of a fellowship? And where would NA be without the basic text? And those are kind of 2 questions that we think about when we're looking at this research. And really the reason that Boyd and I got into doing this is, kind of, I guess when that self-centeredness starts going away and you start realizing, like, why am I so fortunate to be in a time and a place where Narcotics Anonymous is available? What would have happened if I was, born 2 generations ago or 3 generations ago, or live in a part of the world where NA's not as developed or exposed yet, and just real profound gratitude for the fact that I'm an addict today that lives in a time when Narcotics Anonymous is available and has given me and given all of us just freedom and a new life. So there's a lot of interesting history about the evolution of literature for addicts, but for Narcotics Anonymous, our fellowship, the first piece of literature that was written was in 1954. It's often referred to as the Buff Book. And it's in here that we see step 1. It's the first time that the first step was changed. It no longer was focused on a substance, but it was focused on a condition. And so it's really kind of a significant historical piece that in 1954, NA made this really kind of significant decision around the wording of step 1. The other thing that's interesting about the Buff book is that it contains the just for today, and it is unchanged. It's the one piece of literature from 1954 that still exists in our fellowship today, in our meetings, and is completely unchanged. In 1961 or 62, the first little white book was published, and it contained the 12 traditions. And again, this is where we talk about, how does literature impact the culture of a fellowship? Because NA had almost died at this point, and Jimmy was so insistent that the traditions had not been followed, and that's why NA almost died. And in publishing a new booklet and putting the traditions in there, it was a way to embed that information into the culture. By 1966, the little white book was published again, but now it's containing 6 personal stories. And you'll see, for instance, at this time, you have an individual whose story is one woman's story, and she refers to herself as, I'm an addict and an alcoholic. It never was very hard for me to say I was an addict, but it was really hard for me to say I was an alcoholic. And so you still hear kind of this discussion about kind of 2 separate conditions, and that's something that, the basic text has helped change as it's created literature that has become a foundation for the fellowship.
So in our research, we actually came across a first attempt for, for stories from, or from input from the fellowship with this letter of 1972. Now, this is actually a draft copy right here, but the Board of Trustees actually authorizes work on a hardcover book, and Gregg P wrote this letter right here to be put out to the fellowship. And it talks about a World Service Office book committee, and it's asking for input for a hardcover copy. And then in 1976 is when these were copyrighted. You've got the first 6 IPs to hit the table, and there's 3 of them right here, which is Who, What, How, and Why, the group, and So You Love an Addict. And then We Made a Decision, Another Look, and Recovery and Relapse. And if you notice, 4 of those in a revised form, of course, are still on our tables today.
The reservation that, well, maybe I can blow a little weed, every second Tuesday of the month. Nobody be any wiser. It won't hurt me. Or I can take a few pills now and again when I'm down the beach or when I go visit my aunt somewhere and get away with it when we know we can't. If the big AA book brings out the same idea and we laugh at it about the jaywalker, and it's exactly the same way of thinking. The jaywalker who would continually run out from the street in front of cars, in front of fire engines, in front of trolley cars, just for the thrill of beating them. Eventually one day he got hit, landed in the hospital. A couple of days he gets out and he does the same thing again. You say, this guy is nuts. And yet this is exactly what we do. We keep doing it again, but we know we can't win.
So this is, that was Jimmy K talking in a NA meeting in 1962. And it's interesting to us when we look at this clip because, that's not the type of language that we hear shared in a meeting and today. And part of that is the fact that at that time, in 1962, they had the Buff book, which was just like 8 pages, and they had the little white book. But they didn't have a primary text, so they still relied a lot on the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book for examples and experience, strength, and hope, and so forth. And the kind of the question of how does literature impact a fellowship? The absence of a primary textbook kind of results in shares at that time, drawing from another fellowship. It's very fascinating, and we've been really blessed because we've had the opportunity to do a lot of research, and we actually got to see Jimmy's first edition AA Big Book and go through it. And what's fascinating is just seeing all the different people that had signed it. And so we've got his father signing it, saying, "Dear son, many happy returns to the day of you and your family You've got Gene Haig, with all the love of one NA to another. Gene passed away July 10th, 2015 with 53 years of recovery. You have Penny K and Bob B signing it, and we'll talk a little bit more about Bob later in the presentation. You have his brother. His brother was a member of AA. And then interestingly, we have Lois Wilson who signed it, and Lois is one of the co-founders of Al-Anon and wife of Bill W., co-founder of AA. All right, the 7th World Convention is in San Francisco in 1977. And Boyd and I often pause and wonder what would have happened if Bo didn't go out to San Francisco. And this is really where we see kind of the spark for the basic text beginning. And again, it wasn't because there weren't efforts. We can go back 5 years earlier when the Board of Trustees sent out a letter inviting the fellowship to submit input. But Bo took initiative, and it's one of the things that I reflect on about, you know, the ability of any member to take initiative to be of service, and just how impactful those efforts can be in carrying a message. This is where the process for the book really begins. Please, as we're listening to him recall this, pay attention to some of the things in the background, such as the theme for the 7th World Convention, what they called their clean time countdown, who the entertainment was, and so forth.
We had the World Convention planned in San Francisco. So I made a deal with this other guy, Tommy B, that he would go out there, and if he couldn't go, I would go. But one of us would go out there. It wound up, we both went. So we got out to San Francisco, and you are getting to know me a little bit tonight. Can you imagine, let's see, I was 29 or 30 when I got clean. So I was probably like 33 years old. So it'd be a much younger version of me walking around trying to look nonchalant, asking who's working on the book. You know, I would say, like, it's nice weather out here. I like this convention. Who's working on the book? I mean, I was about as subtle as a brickbat. And they kept like, go over here, go over here, go over here, go over here. And I kept going wherever I was told. And within about 3 or 4 interactions like that, I wound up at registration, where I met about half of the people in World Services in 15 minutes. Jimmy Cake, Chuck Skinner, bunches of them, Sally, Jack Whaley, Bob Barrett, and Gregg Pierce. And so Jimmy says, hey, Gregg, this guy's from Atlanta, and he's asking about who's working on the book. And so they sent me off with Gregg. They palmed me off on Gregg. And so we headed off. I mean, he had read a lot of science fiction, and I was science fiction. So I said, like, well, what's the score with the book and all? And he says, well, nobody will work on it. And I said, is that right? Why not? And the same was that Addicts in Recovery can't write. So I said, so does that mean they've tried and failed, or that they haven't tried? He said, well, mostly they haven't tried. I said, well, who can write on this stuff? He said, well, any member. I said, well, I'm a member.
All right, now go ahead.
And, you know, emblematically in that little conversation, you know, I was thinking about all the dead people and the horrible way we die. And, you know, writing's not really that goddamn hard. And so anyway, with his from the top more or less clearance, I started writing some stuff when I went home. I mean, he took me down to some oldest meetings in the world, you know, in California and Hollywood and all that next week. But mainly, I felt like I had permission, you know. And I felt like if I did something, that I could get other people to do stuff.
So there's a lot of, you know, just amazing things in there. I mean, the theme, Now We Are Thousands, you know, back in '77, did a sobriety call instead of a clean time countdown, asking, you know, who can write? You know, does somebody have to be appointed to do this? You know, has people tried and failed, and so forth. And then the motivation that addicts are dying, you know, is really a thing that motivates people. We've learned, Boyd and I, that for some of the folks that attend our presentations, that we also need to do kind of an additional history, not just of Narcotics Anonymous, but some people look at the presentation and say, I don't understand what the entertainment Arm & Hammer disco was. So for our younger members, this is kind of probably what the dance looked like after the convention. So
please allow me to introduce you to Gregg P right now. Gregg was a member of the Board of Trustees. He co-authored with Jimmy K the first service structure of the NA tree. He wrote IP number 9, Living the Program. He wrote IP number 12, The Triangle of Self-Obsession. His story is in the basic text, and it's titled, I Was Different. Sadly, Gregg passed away April of 1999 with 28 years clean. But we're going to listen to Gregg tell you guys about the beginnings of the book right now.
I think the actual process started, at least for this attempt, but actively started in San Francisco. I mean, the things that led up to that, the writing letters, the looking to people, the encouraging people, the phone calls and everything else, those were all setting the stage. I really believe the actual process started in San Francisco in 1977, the 7th World Convention. And it grew from there. I want to read a letter that I think is real indicative that Bo sent me in December of 1977. And I think this letter really speaks to some of the spirit of the basic text, of the process. Dear Gregg, guess who bought a typewriter? I hope you have a nice Christmas. This is December 16th, 1977. Please say hi to Lois and the baby. Hope to see you next year. I've gotten off to a rolling start with the writing. I've started umpteen pamphlets and worked on a few notes for the NA book. My friends here know of my efforts, and I hope to get a few of them together soon for input and discussion. Hopefully this will take place here and elsewhere. Thank God it's begun. At this point, I feel we have to involve as many people as possible, and make sure we cover make sure we cover all points of view. Involving people might struggle the effort and controversy, but I really trust the spirit and believe that we'd be poor servants to leave them out. Somehow, if we could get our best minds working on this in harmony, I just know it would strengthen the gut of the program. In my thinking, it has occurred to me what we're up against, like, is NA a cure for addiction? How to help doctors learn to treat or react to addiction. I would hate to see any valid point of view left out. Also, I would hate to see any great length of time elapse without some progress. Please write to me, my friend, your friend Bo.
So, this is in 1977 that Gregg gets this letter from Bo. This is after the 7th World Convention in San Francisco. And as you can see, Bo is kind of, he's working on, well, just getting some of the things he values down there. But I think what's important is that this is, at this point right here, he's thinking of inclusiveness already. It talks about involving people might struggle the effort and controversy, but I really trust the spirit and believe we'd be poor servants to leave them out. And then he goes on to say, somehow if we could get our best minds working on this in harmony, I know it would just strengthen the gut of the program. He was reaching a little bit here. He talks about how, you know, is NA a cure for addiction? And then still, you know, hadn't quite got a complete focus yet on the points of the book is do we help doctors learn how to treat addiction? So it's a very important letter right here. And I'll give you guys a real quick backstory with this thing. This is this letter, Bo had a fire in his house a few years ago, and all of his archives got burned up, except for this particular letter, because I still have this letter. And it's basically, this is where a character defect became a character asset, because I had actually procrastinated getting this to Bo. And then, of course, Bo had the event of this house burning down, and so we still have the letter, though. So basically, my procrastination, which was a character defect, ended up turning into a character asset, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So, moving right along.
Yeah, the important thing that's a takeaway for everyone is that it's important to preserve your history, you know, your home group, your area, your region, you know. So if you have documents, a real service that you can do for the fellowship is to digitize and preserve your local history. And again, some people are kind of questioning this line, guess who bought a typewriter? For our younger members, this is a typewriter.
So we see that Jimmy and Gregg actually start to encourage Bo. So we know that in January of 1979, Bo actually sent out a letter to the fellowship asking for input. And Bo told me that both Gregg first started out by encouraging him to write a letter, and he says, I really didn't feel comfortable doing it because I was not an elected, trusted servant on a world level. And so Jimmy calls him up and starts talking to him and says, well, Bo, you're actually part of the World Service Office Literature Committee. And Bo told me that he was thinking inside of his head. He says, I was. When did I get elected to that? But obviously, Bo, you know, decided to do it. And he put in there, he says, people who could be helped are dying every day from our disease. And I want you, you know, we put that in red because you're going to see that being a theme all through this. And what he also put in there, a few of us can't do this alone. We need your help. Please send your stories and articles. And this is the World Service Office Literature Committee in Marietta, Georgia. And that will be the only letter you ever see from there. So Bo gets elected in April of 1979, he gets elected as the chairperson of the World Lit Committee. And boy, things really and truly, it's happening now. It's on. So letters start going out to the fellowship. One of them's in the main line, which was in Northern California. It was a regional service letter. We have a copy of it right there on the screen for you. And I'm going to read a couple of places that we really and truly found pretty fascinating that were in the main line. One of them is, we now have literature committees in Venice, California, San Bernardino Valley, Wichita, Kansas, Scranton, PA, Atlanta, Georgia, and prospective committees in Minneapolis and Miami. And it goes on to say the Literature Committee in San Bernardino Valley is working on collecting material on where our literature has come from in the past. The chairperson of the committee is a volunteer worker at the WSO. We have already copied our mail-outs to make them available to ASC members. Trusted servants like this are making the dream of new NA literature come true.
And one of the things that's really fun about looking at this, some of these old newsletters and so forth, is just the little things you find. So kind of in the bottom part of this, it says Narcotics Anonymous says no big shots, no little shots, one shot and we're all shot.
That's great. So a little bit further down the line here in August the 21st of 1979, there's been a scheduled in Wichita, Kansas, and this is kind of the letter going out to announce it. It says, we all need to attend the Wichita Conference for NA Literature. October 6th and 7th will be here soon. And Bo goes on to say, he says, I've discovered that God wants our book. God, as I understand him, is hungry for NA literature, has been waiting for years. But he mentions something very, very important here at the end. Because we don't need hundreds of members trying to get others to write. We need hundreds writing.
So the World Lit Conferences is how the book was assembled. It was written between October 79 and January 82. These are not final numbers, or complete numbers. You know, part of each presentation is a hope that other people will step forward and share more information for more complete history. And it's kind of why we call it a history of the basic text, because it's not complete. But from the minutes, we found 412 addicts participated from 25 different states. We know that there were addicts that attended World Lit conferences that didn't sign in on the minutes. And there's also countless other unknown addicts who contributed through local literature committees and just through individual submissions. So while we focus a lot on the literature conferences, there's a whole bunch of other addicts that were involved with this process. This is the flyer for the first World Lit Conference. It was a 2-day conference. The theme is "You Are the Book." And it says, I would, check here if you'd like to stay in an NA member's home. And this again is kind of a reference back to the context that this is not a funded project, that people have to get there on their own and pay for the expense associated with this without fellowship or World Service Office support. There just wasn't the money at that time. There were 25 addicts that registered and 34 from 6 states that were listed in the minutes, coming from California, Georgia, Kansas, Nebraska, Tennessee, and Virginia. And we're going to listen to a clip with Joseph P. talk about going to Wichita. And it was actually Joseph P.'s archives that we got through Kermit back in 2008 that we were able to digitize that contained a lot of the minutes that served as the initial foundation for this presentation.
And I was told about the first World Literature Conference that was coming up a few months later up in Kansas. And so I'd arranged for the Bo to come through Memphis and pick me up and go up there. I didn't know what it was going to be about. And on the way, talked about a lot of things, and we talked about we were going to write this wee book. And they kept talking about for days this wee book we're going to write. And all this information that Gregg had and other people had was getting piles, and the copy machine was running. And I couldn't figure out how they were going to get all this material in a small book. And it went on and on and on. And what I finally figured out after that convention is the wee book is that we together and not small. But I never asked. So that's where I was.
So what I love about this is the kind of the misperceptions. And I think there could be an entire book dedicated to NA misperceptions. I have a sponsee who, when he attended his first meeting, they were handing out the key tags, and they gave a welcome key tag, and then they gave a 30-day key tag, and he says, I can pledge to do 30 days. Not quite understanding, that you pick it up when you get there, not as a commitment in advance. But what came out of this World Lit Conference is this handbook for Narcotics Anonymous literature committees that provided guidance so that writing could occur throughout the fellowship. And Boyd referenced this in the letter earlier on that Bo wrote in August of '79. A core value that emerged through this literature conference was that input was encouraged, actively sought, and highly valued from all members of the fellowship, regardless of clean time and experience. So a lot of inclusion, and you see this core value contained in many places in the handbook. Right on page 1, it says every member is welcome to contribute material to this effort. We need all types of stories, and yours might be just the one to help your type of addict. We ask all members to send in their material without worrying too much if it is any good or not. Some of the best is probably in trash cans right now. I mean, and that's that therapeutic value of one addict helping another, understanding the insecurities and fears that people may have and not wanting to participate because of not having the confidence and so forth, and just an invitation to say, just, contribute. It says in here, in a real sense, ours is a movement of the message from those who have it to those who are dying for it. Again, that kind of motivation that addicts are dying. And then profanity. We usually ask the audience at this point, what do you think it said about profanity? And I cannot overstate, the significance of this insight and decision by those involved with writing the handbook. They decided that stories can include slang, but not profanity, since this would limit the availability of our book in some areas and institutions. So really recognizing that, you know, the warden may not take this book or allow this book into their prison, or the hospital administrator wouldn't allow it into the institution based on the language, and recognizing that a lot of addicts, you know, are in institutions and prisons and jails. You know, just the forethought in that I thought was really remarkable. And again, like all NA literature, profanity will be edited to ensure that our message is widely available. The only place that we use profanity is here. This is like an example of some of the input that was submitted that was in Joseph P's archives. It was just a half sheet of paper, and it just says the word fuck should not be used. You know, and this is like what's sent in and considered for, you know, for input.
Page of this literature manual here is actually, it's got a page on topics, and this is for topics of the literature committees, just suggestions of topics that they can write on. And Chris and I, we just highlighted 3 of them that we thought were really interesting. The first one that we thought was interesting that your literature committee could write on, if you so choose to, is beer and grass was no excuse. The second one is little old ladies can get sick too. And the third one, I've got to admit, I've just never seen any actual writing on this one anywhere at all. It's called 13th Stepping.
And we don't know if that was to be a cautionary tale or an instructional writing, but this history keeps evolving. And, you know, a couple of years ago, Motorcycle Ed sent us this picture and said, hey, I found this photo of us from the first World Lit Conference in 1979. And, you know, this is why we're so excited to continue to evolve this presentation as more history becomes available. The second World Lit Conference is held 11 months later. So a lot of time goes by between the first and the second. But the second one is a little bit longer. It's a 6-day conference, and it's held in Lincoln, Nebraska. But you can still see the influence of Alcoholics Anonymous. The theme is come help us write the big book. And you had 36 members from 8 states, California, Georgia, Kansas, Nebraska, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. And you had a member from Vancouver, British Columbia. We know that 7 members who were at the Wichita Literature Conference attended this, so that provided some continuity both to process and you know, format. And importantly, there were a couple board of trustees that attended as well, Bob B. and Gregg P.
So this is Bob B. right here. Bob is a member of the board of trustees. The story in the basic text is titled, I Found the Only NA Meeting in the World. And sadly, he passed away in June of 2015 with over 53 years of recovery. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, Bob Barrett was probably the best goodwill NA ambassador NA has ever had. A very gentle spirit there and a very nice man. But what was very important that happened at the second World Lit Conference was that both Bob and Greg showed up. And that actually ended up lending a lot of weight to this movement, if you will, because a lot of folks on the California coast just kind of wondered what these folks on the East Coast were really up to, and, you know, didn't pay it a whole lot of attention. But with 2 members of the Board of Trustees coming out there and getting behind it, it started lending validity to the movement. And a very important decision was made at this one, and Greg suggests using the chapters from the White Book as an outline for the chapters of the NA Big Book. Bo, in his book, A Story of the Basic Text, he actually believes that this is something that Greg and Jimmy had talked about before, and it was basically Greg and Jimmy's idea. There were 2 additional chapters were added. Just for today, living the program, and more will be revealed, which Greg envisioned as a version of AA's A Vision for You. And how we learned that was by listening to the tapes of the second World Lit Conference. So I'm going to introduce you to a man now named Jim N. Now, Jim is actually the chairperson of this conference. And he lived in Lincoln, Nebraska. He got clean in November of '71. He passed away in December 2013, right before his 42nd anniversary. And this is just a memory that needs to be reserved. And so as you're listening to Jim, Chris actually brought this up one time. He says, I want you to think about this. Think about when your sponsor asks you to do something. Maybe drive across town to pick up that sponsee or that new person and take them to a meeting. You know, just anything that may rub you a little bit the wrong way of doing some service work, and listen to what Jim and some other folks did.
Well, my neighbor offered me a ream of paper in the use of his copy machine, so that wasn't the problem. The problem was postage. So there were 5 of us sitting around the kitchen table at my place one day, and I made the comment, well, I guess I've sold plasma to support my aunt. We can probably make a trip to the plasma center and get a pint of blood is $15 and a roll of stamps is $15. And so the guys all went down the blood bank and sold blood. And we went back to the house and laughing and joking, and each of us had a roll of stamps in our pocket, and we addressed flyers and sent them to every address that I could get my hands on.
So think about that. These guys gave blood in order to get money to buy stamps to send out flyers announcing this conference. I don't know about you, but I just kind of get a little bit of goosebumps when I think about that. But that's definitely willing to go to any lengths. And, you know, thank you, Jim. My hat's off to you.
It speaks again to the whole idea of inclusion, of wanting to include everyone, and that we're better with, everyone's input and participation. Kind of along this theme of, support and everything, we're going to listen to George R. Kind of share some of his experience. And again, it's really similar to sacrifice and then support from the fellowship. George got clean in 1977. His story, It Won't Get Any Worse, appears in the 2nd through the 5th edition. And we'll listen to George talk about this.
Bo kept telling me to go to the World Convention and then the Second World Literature Conference in Lincoln, Nebraska. The 10th World Convention was in Wichita, Kansas. We were broke. I mean, we had no money. I was 20 years old. And I actually, to go to that, I sold my washer and dryer, and I bought a train ticket because I couldn't afford to fly. And it took me a day and a half to get out there on a train. Now, when I got there, I had $70 for the 4 days at the convention, the 7 days at the literature conference, and the day and a half train ride there and the day and a half ride back. I think I was broke before we got to the literature conference. I didn't have a place to stay. And this became an MO for the literature conferences. Just come. We'll figure all that stuff out when we get there,
During that kind of 11 months between the first and second World Lit Conference, 800 pages of material was collected, and it was assembled in a unique fashion. Material was first cut and filed under different chapter headings. The material was then pasted into topics within each chapter. This is an incredibly laborious way to assemble input and to create a text. And we'll listen to Motorcycle Ed talk about that.
I believe it's the second one that I showed up at. The real treat for me was get to do what all the other people had got to do in kindergarten that I didn't get to do because I didn't get to go to kindergarten, was little itty bitty scissors and cut up pieces of paper and take the paste stick and put it on the back and paste it on another piece of paper. And the kid in me, of course, I didn't know what to call it at that time, just went berserk. Hot diggity doggy dum.
And we are really excited because we have Motorcycle Ed here, and he's going to share for a couple minutes about his reflections and experience with this and the writing of the basic text. And I just want to personally thank Motorcycle Ed for always being so encouraging and loving and supportive of Boyd and I, and just really being, kind of an elder statesman.
Thank you. My name's Ed, and I'm an addict.
Hey, Ed.
The first and foremost, Chris and Boyd, to me, are the modern day heroes because they put all this together and is, maintaining it. And, the story about Jim and his guys that a lot of people don't get to know is all of them was heroin addicts. And for them to go put a needle in their arm to buy stamps. I had a guy ask me a couple of months ago about he had heard the rumor that the basic text was written in blood. And I said, yeah, sure was. And of course, at that time, I didn't know about sacred ceremonies. I didn't know about how you honor stuff. And today I do. And, the whole writing of the text was a sacred event for me. It was a whole, 5 years of on and on. And it turned out to be, one of the main things that changed my life and changed the unknown number of other people's, and I still get emotional when I see this stuff and, brings back memories about, seeing Bo type at that little typewriter. I lived in Marietta, Georgia when I got clean. And I'd go over to his house and he'd be at that little typewriter. The one on the screen is an upgrade from what Bo really had, but that was electric on the screen. He had a manual, and that's what we was using was manuals. We didn't have electric typewriters till, probably the 6th or 7th conference, but, the real blessing is how many lives have been saved, because of dedication and because of dreams come true. So it's on and on. Every time you think of one thing, it leads to another memory and it leads to another one. And, getting to see some of these people that I ain't seen in 20, 30 years today, is heartwarming. This old soul is warm. But thank you for letting me be a part of.
Thank you, Ed. We love you.
Thank you, Ed.
We put together a very special ending for this presentation that I think you'll appreciate very much, and just love you so much.
Very much so, Ed. Very much so. And this is Charles K. right here. And Charles attended 3 of the World Lit conferences. His story is An Indian Without a Tribe. It appears in the 1st through the 5th editions. And we're going to listen to Charles tell you a little bit about the cut and paste.
Hi, everybody. I'm Charles K. and I'm an addict. Some of the things you might not, that they touched on a little bit, like the cut and paste, that's how the whole book was put together. People cutting single lines out, pasting them on paper, photocopying it, passing it out to like everybody here. You would read it and go, no, I don't like that. We want to change that. So you cut that out, you paste it again, you re-photocopy it, and you kept doing that till you got to something you liked in your workshop. Then it went to the main group, and the literature committee was doing consensus before consensus was popular. That's how every line of the book was approved by consensus.
So now we've got the literature prayer here, and we're actually going to listen to George R. tell you a little bit about the literature prayer.
I have basic text on my phone, and what I read is what's it known as now, the service prayer. To me, it's still known as the literature prayer because that's where it comes from. It talks about, help us write, before every conference meeting, every conference workshop, at our home workshops that, our own literature in Bucks County and in Philadelphia, before we started, we would read that prayer. And when that prayer was read, it was almost like, I'm getting goosebumps now. Like the fog would roll in and you could just feel everyone would release their control and kind of let God's will take over because we were there for a purpose.
All right, and we're going to listen to Charles K. tell you a little bit more about it.
And we're thrilled to have Charles joining us live to share about his experience and reflections.
Oh, so okay. Let's unmute.
Hey, everybody. I'm an addict named Charles. This prayer and what George was talking about probably had the most impact on me of anything when it came to writing the book, because when we said that prayer and we truly asked God to make us an instrument, you could feel the presence just like you felt the guy sitting next to you. It was the most profound spiritual experience I've ever had in my life. And it was a continuing thing every time we got together. It's like Ed was talking, it chokes you up because you knew you were doing something great and you knew you were doing something impactful, but you also knew it wasn't you. You couldn't take any credit for that. You knew that you were just a vehicle in the right place at the right time, and God was using you like you needed to be used. And the most amazing thing about that is you look at the 400 and something people that were at these things. I don't know what the actual number of people who are still clean is, but I guarantee you it's probably 70–80%, because we all experience that. We all experience this God of our understanding coming in, taking everyday addicts from all walks of life, every corner, putting us together, and we were able to agree on things. I mean, how remarkable is that? You can't even get 4 people to agree where to go eat dinner, But hundreds of us got together, invited God into this situation, and were able to come to a conclusion with what you have today as the basic text. And if I never do anything else the rest of my recovery, I've got that will always be with me to the day I die. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Charles, very much. I really appreciate it. And, I just, it's really a shout out goes to you from Chris and I, just like with Motorcycle Ed and you guys being so open and accessible with all your stories and your time. And Chris and I really appreciate it. Yeah. So one of the places that we find a lot of information out is in newsletters. And this one came out in October of '80, right after the Second World Lit Conference. And it's called The Rainbow Connection. It was printed out of Atlanta, Georgia. And is Bo here by any chance?
Oh, if you're here, you can raise your hand or message me.
Message in the chat.
Yeah, we've been looking for him. We're not sure he's here yet.
Okay.
You can go ahead and read it, Boyd.
Yeah, I'll do that. So this is a wonderful piece of history that we had hoped Bo would be able to read it, because the truth is, although he's never said he wrote it, you know, Chris and I've looked at so much of his writing that we feel pretty positive he wrote it. So I'm going to read you a couple of lines in here that I think is really important. It says, although relatively few of the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous stood in the Lincoln Federal Building in September of 1980, the spirits of our contributors and of those still suffering addicts were all around us, encouraging us, sharing with us their hope and their pain. Those who enjoyed the actual moment were but servants of a larger whole. You want the whole thing read, Chris, or just?
Yeah, we'll just go to the next one, the last paragraph, which is so impactful.
Yeah. As a result of addicts meeting in Lincoln, Nebraska in September of 1980, a book, a dream will be realized. But it would be inaccurate to say that we have written a book. We have all come from many parts of the country and many walks of life. We have all, by the grace of our higher power and the help of our fellow addicts, survived a killing disease. I'm going to repeat that. Survived a killing disease. In an effort to continue to survive, we have met here to share our experience, strength, and hope. The book is just a reflection of this effort. It is in this spirit that our book will come forth. Addicts all over the world will have Narcotics Anonymous for comfort and for study. When we find ourselves by ourselves, we need not be alone. We will have our book and we will have each other.
At the end of the presentation, we'll kind of give you a timeline of the number of meetings worldwide by year. And at the time that this was written, to envision that this would be something that would be shared worldwide for addicts, you know, is really amazing. The third World Lit Conference is in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's only a few months after the second one. And we're going to listen to Joseph P. talk about the decision to go to Memphis.
I'm an addict from Memphis. My name's Joseph. They were going to set up a time to have the next one. And, of course, me being the assertive, good controlling addict that I was, I wanted to volunteer Memphis. And so I did. And, of course, I was the only clean member in Memphis. But things worked out, and we had that literature conference that the Gray book came out of.
One of the things that stood out to us in this flyer is it says, with gratitude in our cleanliness, which is language we don't hear much today, at least in North Carolina. So we see things have gotten a little more formal in terms of registration with typeset. Pre-registration's 12. We're also seeing questions about whether those attending are a member of Nar-Anon, so you got some families getting involved. This is the longest World Lit Conference to date. It's over a week long with 73 people attending from 14 different states. And I'm going to turn over to Boyd here.
Yeah, we're going to listen to George R. tell you about who they discussed, who they were actually writing the book for at this conference.
At the Memphis conference, we talked about how this was going to change Narcotics Anonymous, and the purpose of us writing it was for addicts seeking recovery today, addicts that haven't used yet, and addicts that haven't even been born yet. We knew this was long term, and for me today, sometimes I get asked to speak, and I got introduced as, he's been around so long, he's been clean longer than I've been born. Before I was born, actually before my parents even met yet.
So this is actually a copy of the minutes from January 31st of 1981. And there was a very important decision that was made there, which was they're trying to complete the final draft of the Narcotics Anonymous Big Book. So it's still being called the NA Big Book at this time.
They wanted to get it submitted to the World Service Conference 2 months prior to the service conference. We see the influence of AA and the cooperation with AA. There's a letter from the AA General Service Office to Bo saying we send warm wishes for a successful conference in Memphis. We see chapters that are being worked on by the local literature committees. And this is, again, some of the stories that need to be explored and further documented. Atlanta worked on chapter 1, Who's an Addict? Gregg P worked on the 12 Traditions, chapter 6. Chapter 7 was submitted from San Francisco, Recovery and Relapse. Chapter 8, We Do Recover, was submitted by the Bristol Literature Committee in Pennsylvania. And chapter 10, More Will Be Revealed, was submitted by the Philadelphia Literature Committee. And this is an example of some of the input that we found in Joseph P's archives and submitted by the Bristol Literature Committee. And I'll turn it back over to Boyd at this point.
Yeah, actually, and this was a picture that Al Lahr had actually given to Chris a while back of the Bristol Literature Committee, and we actually have Al scheduled to speak with us and tell us the story about that. So, Al, if you're there, it's your turn.
I'm an addict by the name of Al. Yeah, there's in that picture is myself, George, Pete B. He's in the meeting tonight. It was an apartment. Phil and Kenny had an apartment in Bristol, Pennsylvania, and I guess we kind of got tired of reading out of the. We took the AA Big Book and we crossed out alcohol and put drugs, and we were just kind of tired of doing that. So we started to work on the writing. Doing some writing on basic text, and as you just cited, we were working on chapter 8, and George was involved with the Philadelphia Literature Committee too. And we would meet, usually like on a Saturday night or whatever the case. Probably half of us weren't working, but so we would meet and spend some time. We'd all kind of go off in our own little corner and write and then talk about it and talk about what what was good, what was not so good, et cetera, et cetera. And so that picture is in their apartment, during that time period. Thank you.
Al, let me ask you a question. Let's see if we can put him back on here. I've often been curious. I mean, the Bristol is how far away from Philly? Let's get you back on. Hold on. Okay. Well, Shane's got to unmute him.
He's got to accept it. Al, you got to accept the unmute. There you go.
No, I'm sorry. As you leave Philadelphia, Bristol is in Bucks County, about maybe 10 minutes north of the Philadelphia border, right on the Delaware River. The Delaware River goes right next to Philly, and as you go north up the Delaware River, you're in Bristol, about 10 minutes north of this border.
Yeah, so why did you have a literature committee in Bristol and one in Philly? I mean,
well, because we had started one in Bristol, and then the folks in Philly wanted to start one, and George kind of said to them, well, why don't you come down and join us? But they lived in the city. Nobody had cars, so they couldn't get to Bristol at the time. So what George did is he went down and he helped them to get one going in Philadelphia. His first one was like everybody was packed together, shoulder to shoulder in this room, and he actually he facilitated it from the hallway, because there was people in the hallway, there's people in the living room, like they were so excited about it. And, that's kind of how the Philadelphia Literature Committee got started.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Al, I also want to give a shout out to you too, man. Chris and I really, really appreciate all the wonderful stories you've told us and your availability. And it's just, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So anyway, guys, I'm going to introduce you. Well, I've already introduced you to a man named Gregg P, but this is, if for those who didn't know, Gregg actually wrote chapter 6, the 12 and the basic text interpretations of the 12 tradition. And it was really interesting about how they came about getting what Gregg wrote. Gregg wasn't able to make it to Memphis. He was still in Oregon. So they talked about Gregg driving down to Portland and airshipping it over to Memphis. And, you know, that was going to take quite a bit of time, and they didn't really feel like they had that. So instead, they did something in a very unique way.
One of the things that did happen in Memphis was, how long was the conversation phone call? 2 calls totaling over 9 hours. And a little gal sitting there, and they'd take turns typing. You know, one person would hold the phone to their ear, and they would type, and another person would rub their back so they wouldn't cramp up. And, you know, just over and over and over times again of the selflessness.
So that right there is Molly sitting on, can you see the arrow pointing to the briefcase that she's sitting on? And that's another indication of the selfless service. I once asked Lois P., Gregg's widow, if she remembered that phone call. And she said, oh yes, I remember it very much. We were actually paying for the call, and our phone was cut off for about 2 months, because at that time, you know, you were charged for long distance. And so those were, you know, just some of the ways that, well, people contributed. Bo once told me a story. He says, if you were a member of the literature committee and you didn't have your phone cut off once or twice, you just really weren't doing a whole lot. So anyway, it's a pretty unique story that that shows just what willingness they had to get us the book. Introduce you to a man named Jim M. Jim became involved at the Memphis Literature Conference, and despite business commitments, he flew back and forth between Ohio and Memphis several times in February of '81 to help get the Gray Review form prepared for distribution. And in Bob Stone's book, he said, Bo said that Bo told me that Jim was relied upon to catch a logical flaw or carry out an approved plan of action. And so Jim hosted the 5th World Literature Conference in Warren, Ohio. And by listening to the tapes of the 3rd World Lit Conference, we found out Jim was very instrumental in emphasizing consistent and fellowship-specific language. And we're gonna listen to Jim talk to you about the style sheet in just a minute.
So Jim, this is a style sheet. I don't mean anything. All it is what we're trying to do is use the same words will mean the same thing all the way through. If something came out at early literature conference work, said use the word you mean. You know? Just for example, I'll go through one example. Use the word or phrase clean in reference to the condition of abstinence from drugs, or instead of clean and sober, clean and serene, straight or sober. Is that understandable?
So that's audio actually from the 3rd World Literature Conference in Memphis. And this is, you can imagine input coming in from so many different places, and, you know, trying to figure out how are we going to take all these different references to different words and phrases and put it into something that's kind of universal for the basic text. Some of the most impactful stuff that I've learned while researching the history has to do with group conscience. We're going to listen to Joseph P. discuss that.
And at that conference, I think we really started to develop what, in our minds, or what was spiritually attuned to what we thought group conscience was, is writing in committee and writing in groups and letting everybody that wanted to be a part of, and not limiting anyone's participation for any reasons.
And so we're going to be able to experience what group conscience was like. This is going to be audio from the Third World Lit Conference in Memphis. And they're discussing how to handle a particular topic. And we're going to listen to a woman named Gina and Bo and Dan kind of discuss this. And it'll give us a real feel for kind of how group conscience was utilized. And I got to tell you, like, learning about this stuff has really not only impacted me in terms of my own recovery and my service at a home group level, but really my professional life in a lot of ways too.
I'm Gina, and I'm definitely an addict. Okay, the way they handle a lot of this in the Visual of Alcoholics Anonymous is by referring you to the appendix at the end and really expounding on this, on the spiritual concept and the fact that it's not any one particular kind of God. I think it would really help for us to have a short appendix, a short but very to the point appendix.
Well, I know that there's some people here that are upset about this now, and I want to give a brief statement from everybody about this. And go around to everybody. Well, they may, they may not. Let's hear from them in a very brief form, one in order, just all the way around, and no repeat until we get around, no discussion until we get around. Then we'll have a feel for what the group has to say, and then get into the details. No, just a feel for it.
I think that right there really is what kind of impacted me, the commitment with a room full of 40, 50 people to say, we're going to listen to every person. We're not going to cut them off. We're not going to ask questions. There's no jumping in after you shared saying, hey, one more thing. And we're just going to practice listening to each person. At the end of that, we'll have a feel for what the group conscience is. And so Dan starts off, kind of sharing his experience with this. And he's the first of many to contribute to what would become the group conscience on this topic.
I'm Dan, I'm an addict. And I sort of the same position this guy here. I didn't like people that talk about God when treatment had got my stuff together a little bit. I like the idea of using higher power, and I like the freedom that gave me to choose if I wanted to consider the stars and the moon, or if I wanted to consider the sunlight or whatever. Just a higher power thing. And it is a very important subject to be discussed, I agree. Now, it doesn't offend me now, God, I believe in God now. I didn't then. So how power is good now, or then, God is good for right now.
There's a couple things you hear in these old audio cassettes. You hear chairs kind of scratching across the floor, and you hear lighters. And so in one of the slides that we were looking at, one of the photos, ashtrays all over the place. And the question is, did you get clean when you could smoke in meetings? Interestingly, with meetings being on Zoom, I've seen more people smoking in meetings than I have in 30 years. There was a telegram that was sent by Jimmy to the folks at the Third World Lit Conference, and it said, the full fruit of a labor of love lies in the harvest, and that always comes in its right season. Yours in fellowship and love, Jimmy Kinnan. And Boyd and I always managed to fall into rabbit holes, and we did at just about 5:20 today as we're prepping for the presentation. We started saying, when did that start appearing in the basic text? And we found that it appeared for the first time in the third edition of the basic text in October of '84. His quote appears there in the beginning of the foreword. This is what it looked like to send a telegram at that time.
So here's the progress in Memphis. This was put out on actually Thursday, not even fully through the conference yet, just partly through. And it says, first, that a great deal of groundwork was accomplished at Wichita and Lincoln conferences that only now be in evidence. Second, that a great deal of work has been done since Lincoln Literature Conference by individuals and areas, and that their work has been unseen until Memphis. And third, and probably the greatest factor of all, is that the potential for new literature is built up in the spoken traditions of Narcotics Anonymous over the last 20 years.
just to kind of point out again, it says the 1,440 service hours put in by Thursday. And it's just to speak to the amount of effort that was put into this book. One of the things we've been trying to do is to capture more voices of women and their role in the writing of the basic text. And we're really excited that we got a chance to interview Linda M. Last November. She attended all 7 World Literature Conferences and served as the librarian. Her story Pothead appears in editions 1 through 5 of the basic text. And we'll listen to her talk about Memphis.
So I was always lightweight, went home by midnight kind of thing. But I stayed up for like 40, 41, 42 hours during this time frame because there was this urgency where we realized that every hour that went by an addict was out there dying with nothing, absolutely nothing. And so there was this urgency. We got to get it done. We got to get it done.
That just kind of, emphasizes again that theme that we've heard going back to Bo visiting the 7th World Convention. At the end of the 3rd World Lit Conference, they had a banquet, and the cake was the NA Big Book. So we still are using that language. What happened after the literature conference was the assembling of the review form, and this was done by Joseph P. And the Gray review form gets printed in February of 1981. It's self-funded by the people attending the World Lit Conference, and the fellowship funds it. And it's a very intentional way of including the fellowship for input. So the Gray review form, each page, each line on each page is numbered. And you would get this review input form, and you could put your name, your area, and you could check off, we find the material complete and satisfactory in its present form, or 2, in order for our book to be complete and satisfactory, we recommend the following corrections. And then you could say page number, line number, and put your comments. And I mean, this is one of the places where we're really excited to try to get more input about people's experiences if they were involved in submitting review and comment from the Gray review form. And this is a photo of them being assembled and them being shipped off. And we found a air freight slip to Jimmy Kinnan, sending him Gray review form number 1, which is the picture of it here. It says, Jimmy, your personal copy, and the first off the press for the archives. Love, Roger.
Excuse me. So now we've got the 4th literature conference, which is held in Santa Monica, California. And it's actually right before the World Service Conference. And its theme was, you've seen the book and the time has come. It was the conference that had the most people attended, which was 146 people attended. And they were from 15 different states. Okay. And here's something that that we thought was really from the fellowship in Iowa. It says, our prayers and thoughts are with you, hoping for the reality of our big book.
And that came from Council Bluffs, Iowa.
And here's a picture of the first book that was first Gray review form that was used at the 1981 service conference, and you can see all the people that attended and signed it. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, so you see Motorcycle Ed, you see Linda's name on here, a whole bunch of other folks that are on. The 5th World Lit Conference is held shortly after the World Service Conference. Same theme, it's in Warren, Ohio from June 29th to July 5th. 115 people attended from 18 different states. And we'll listen to Jim talk about what he did to help his wife and other members get to Warren, Ohio.
I sold a motorcycle to Jim. I sold him the bike for $1,500, if my memory serves me correctly, and was Donna's bike in my mind, so she took the $1,500 and took a couple of vans full of people to the conference in Ohio.
This is Sally E. Sally got clean September 1st, 1969. She was on the Board of Trustees and passed away 3 days shy of her 45th anniversary. And we'll listen to her recall the World Literature Conference.
You know, there's a lot of things that happened with writing that book and a lot of miracles. And in Ohio, we were divvying up the workload, and there was a guy, and he raised his hand and he said, I can't read and I can't write, but I can cook. And if each of you will give me $3 a day, I'll fix you some good meals. And he did. That guy was so special. I mean, it was so special that he had the courage to do that. How many of us would have been able to do that? He only had a few months. He didn't have that much time. And by the way, Bob B tells me he's still clean today.
It's just a great story of inclusion, you know, finding a way for people to contribute in whatever way they're capable of contributing.
As Chris and I were creating this PowerPoint, we had a kind of a working title to it called Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and that one being the tears part.
Listen to Charles K. again.
Me and Tom, we hitchhiked from Santa Monica to Warren, Ohio for the Lit Conference. And I mean, amazingly, it was like one of those God things where you got rides that would take you full states or 2 states over, and you'd be on the road for maybe 10 minutes and somebody else would pick you up. Well, we hitchhiked there, stayed in Warren. Then we went from Warren, we were going to Miami. So we went through Philly, hitchhiking still, down the coast, stop offs in DC, Atlanta, and then, you know, made it down to Miami. Nope, don't know anybody. I knew Bob. It's like, Bob, we're coming into town. All right, I got a place for you to stay. Hooked us up at somebody's house, you know, and then I ended up staying. It was like nothing was planned. It's like, well, that's where the World Convention's going to be, and then the Lit Conference is after that. So we're going to be there.
So now we've got the 6th World Lit Conference in Miami, Florida. And actually, Charles was the chairperson of that. So the theme is that others may find the freedom of recovery that we have found. 60 people attended from 15 different states. But what's important about this one also is that a lot of the people from California, the world level trusted servants, had come to Miami for the convention, and so a lot of them stayed over afterwards to work on the final edit of the basic text, if you will.
We're going to give you the sweat part of the blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah, right now I'm going to call this guy Mr. Anonymity, and he had a really special way about getting to Miami. I can't wait for you to hear this story.
Yeah, one of the questions you had was about, you know, the trip going down to the Miami Lit Conference from Lincoln. And basically that was, you know, in 81, riding my bicycle from Lincoln down to Miami. I wish I could tell you it was well thought out and planned, but it really wasn't. It was more just like I wanted to get down for the Lit Conference. I wanted to go to the convention as well, but it was more to get to the Lit Conference, Miami, and it was an adventure. I was still a kid. It was something exciting to do, and at that point, I had experienced so much with the different Lit conferences. I knew I was going to be able to find people along the way and find people once I got down there that I'd be able to survive, and I guess I wanted more of that fellowship at that point. It was truly a just for today kind of a process. It was, you know, get on the bike and ride and do 100 miles or so and keep going the next day.
This was pre-Google, so we're not sure his exact route, but this is how Google Maps would take you if you want to bike from Lincoln to Miami.
So now we're gonna listen to Charles K. tell you a little bit about the conference.
At the 6th Literature Conference, we read each line and voted on every single line. Not whole chapters, not pages or paragraphs, but every line. And as I read each line, I would check yes or no. If it was a no, it went back and got worked on. And that's where the white approval form came from, was that conference there. After every line had been approved, then that was made up and sent out as something that, here's our book. Here's what we're offering to you as a finished product.
And the approval form was actually printed and first distributed at the very first Tennessee Regional, or Tennessee Volunteer Regional, in I think it was Thanksgiving of 1981. And then after the new year, the 7th World Lit Conference came, and it was held in Philadelphia. It was 4 days, 67 people attended from 7 different states. And it was held here in this particular house, who I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was Al, George, and Pete lived there. And I'm totally amazed, guys, because I really look at this house and think 67 people traveled through this thing over a weekend, a long weekend. But this is actually the product that they produced, was this right here, which is a this is the basic, this is the draft, if you will, for the stories that was sent out. It had all the stories over there. You can see on the columns, do you want this one, that one, yes or no. It also has right there, it's interesting to Chris and I that it says there at the end, do you want to hear, how do you want to deal with the references to AA? So even at this late date, they're still doing some processing of that.
The following slides just kind of show the involvement of people who attended the World Literature Conferences from where they were geographically. Again, this doesn't speak to the folks that contributed from local literature committees or their individual submissions, but you can see more folks are getting involved from around the United States through these. When we looked at the minutes, you know, the majority of people attended one of the World Lit Conferences. And what that tells us is that there were people that provided kind of the continuity by attending multiple literature conferences. So you had Bo and Linda at all 7, Hank and Joseph at 6, Doug, Jim, Teresa, and Tom at 5, and so forth. We're very fortunate. We were able to get audio from NAS of the 1982 World Service Conference, where the basic text is approved, and we're going to play that for you now.
And we have a vote. We have a vote. Let's not confuse it. I'll clarify that. I'm out of order, but I'll clarify that that can be decided whether it's, you know, white or blue or fat or tall or. Okay, we're going to have a vote now. All in favor of accepting the basic text approval form as the first edition of our Narcotics Anonymous book, please stand. The book is passed.
So for the longest time, all we had was a little piece of paper that said we have a book, and we showed you from the motions. But Chris and I were out at the World Service office one time, and we begged if we might be able to get that, and they said that they would see, and they actually wanted you guys to be able to hear it. So, you know, it's really interesting because one of the problems that came up is how are we going to fund this printing of the book? Because if you remember, the World Service Office did not even fund this whole project. And so we found a letter actually in Gregg P's archives. And so I think the idea originated from him is that they make a special edition and they charge a special price for it, and they pre-sell it in order to be able to get money up to give to the publisher to be able to publish the book. And that's exactly what happened. And so this right here is a letter that actually said that you could order the NA Big Book, okay? And they wanted $25 for it. So in 1982, $25 was a hefty sum of change. And this is what, this is it right here. Now, if you ordered it, this is a card that you got back from the office saying that, they received your check and that it will be sent to you no later than November of 1982. But unfortunately, it didn't quite happen that way. So here is a picture of that special edition. They called it the NA Basic Text Red. They're numbered editions. There's a few out there that are unnumbered. And but this one right here is the blue edition, and this is what was put on the table for meetings and sold as a non-special. I'm not sure exactly. I think they sold it for $8 at that time, 8 something and some change. And here's a picture of a silver edition. Now there are only 2 of these, and the story behind them is that, see, what happened is in the 11th hour, the money that Jimmy had given to the printer to print the basic text, this guy took drunk and actually took off with our money. And it was a considerable amount of money. And the person who was the president of the World Service Office at that time, and that was not Jimmy, it was another person, knew somebody in the publishing industry, and her name was Jeannie. And so she actually was our angel that came to us in the 11th hour and helped Jimmy and the office get this, and the board of trustees and all the people out there get this book published. And so she actually had two of these made, and we have pictures here of the inscriptions in both. And one of them is to, from Jeannie to Jimmy, and one of them is from, to Jeannie from Jimmy. And pretty special editions right there. Here's a picture of the very first book off the press, and Jimmy wanted that so that he could actually weigh it, so he would know how much it was going to cost to ship it. Here's a picture of the only NA softcover first edition, and the story behind this is that the person who printed it or bound them, I'm not exactly sure which, was actually did the Oscars of that year. And so he felt that this was such a Oscar-worthy presentation of a book, he actually made this for Jimmy. And so here is a picture of the 1 millionth copy of the basic text, which was, these were commemorative editions printed in 1988. Here's the 20th anniversary, which is printed in 2002. Here's the 25th, 2008. And here's the 30th edition, 30th anniversary edition, printed in 2013. And so I got to tell you guys something about the last line of the first edition. In the very first edition, there's Tom C's story, Mid-Pacific Serenity. And originally it was the last chapter in the basic text. And so in the first edition and first edition only, the very last line reads, "God is loving us now." And that's just so cool. And I would not have known that had Tom not told me that at a fundraiser that was done down in Miami along for the East Coast Conference a long time ago. So,
the impact of the book, it unified the message and language of Narcotics Anonymous. Bob Stone says that NA would not have had the financial resources to meet the challenges that growth in the 80s afforded. And again, this growth, you know, I referenced this earlier. This is a timeline of meetings worldwide. So in 53, we had a meeting, had a couple meetings in 60. When Bo goes to the 7th World Convention, there's only 764 meetings worldwide. When the basic text comes out in 83, there's 3,382 meetings. And as of the most recent World Service Conference, there's 76,000 worldwide meetings now. This growth that occurred after the basic text came out is just unbelievable. There was a small dip. Boyd gets clean here. You can see that worldwide meetings drop pretty significantly. I speculate that, you know, he hadn't worked the steps yet, so he's probably pretty obnoxious to be around. He works the steps and people start coming back in and meetings start, you know, growing again in Narcotics Anonymous. Without the book, the message of NA could have become fragmented. The fellowship could have been eclipsed by other recovery movements. And here's the amazing thing. If we go back to the Rainbow Connection and what it talked about addicts around the world will have the book for comfort and for study, you know, that was written in 1980. We go back to George R. talking about, we were writing this for addicts today, addicts that haven't come into the room yet, addicts who haven't started using yet, addicts who haven't been born yet. When we think about Motorcycle Ed and the folks talking, Charles talking about the literature prayer, you know, here's where we are today. The basic text is printed in 33 languages, making the message of Narcotics Anonymous available to so many others. And Boyd and I just finished a very special project where we asked people to read a step or a tradition in their language. And this is our first time presenting this very special ending to the history of the basic text.
Narcóticos Anônimos. Se você quer o que nós temos a oferecer e está disposto a fazer esforço para obtê-lo, então está preparado para dar certos passos. Estes são os princípios que possibilitaram nossa recuperação.
Abbiamo ammesso di essere impotenti sulla nostra dipendenza e che la nostra vita era divenuta ingovernabile.
เราเริ่มเชื่อว่ามีบางสิ่งที่มีพลังมากกว่าตัวเราซึ่งสามารถช่วยให้เรากลับไปมีสติได้
Πήραμε την απόφαση να παραδώσουμε τη θέλησή μας και τη ζωή μας στη φροντίδα του Θεού της κατανόησής μας.
4. Sin miedo hicimos un detallado inventario moral de nosotros mismos.
Trin 5. Vi indrømmer for Gud, os selv og et andet menneske, vor fejl sande natur.
Ние бяхме напълно готови Бог да отстрани всички тези дефекти от характера ни.
Stap 7. Ons het om nederig gevra om ons tekortkominge te verwyder.
Kita membuat daftar orang-orang yang telah kita sakiti dan menyiapkan diri untuk memperbaikinya kepada mereka semua. 我们在可能的状况下去弥补这些人，除非如此，就会造成他们或别人的伤害。
המשכנו בחשבון נפש אישי, וכאשר שגינו, הודינו בכך מיד.
سعيا من خلال الدعاء والتأمل إلى تحسين صلتنا الواعية بالله على قدر فهمنا داعين فقط أن يمنحنا المعرفة لمشيئته لنا والقوة على تنفيذها.
با بیداری روحانی حاصل از برداشتن این قدم‌ها ما کوشیدیم این پیام را به معتادان برسانیم و این اصول را در تمام امور زندگی خود به اجرا درآوریم.
Det här låter som ett jättearbete och vi kan inte göra alltihop på en gång. Vi blir inte beroende på en dag. Så kom ihåg, ta det lugnt.
on yksi asia, joka enemmän kuin mikään muu voi tehdä tyhjäksi toipumisemme. Välinpitämätön tai suvaitsematon asenne hengellisiin periaatteisiin. Tarvitsemme välttämättä niistä 3. Rehellisyyttä, ennakkoluulottomuutta ja halukkuutta. Niiden avulla pääsemme jo hyvän matkaa eteenpäin.
Wij zijn van mening dat onze benadering van de ziekte verslaving volkomen realistisch is, aangezien de therapeutische waarde van een verslaafde die een andere helpt zonder weerga is. Wij menen dat onze manier praktisch is, want de ene verslaafde kan het best de andere verslaafde begrijpen en helpen. Wij geloven dat hoe eerder wij onze problemen in het dagelijks leven onder ogen zien, hoe sneller wij aanvaardbare, verantwoordelijke en productieve leden van onze maatschappij zullen worden.
Az egyetlen módja, hogy távol maradjunk az aktív függőségtől az, hogy nem használjuk azt az első adagot. Ha olyan vagy, mint mi, akkor tudod, hogy egy is sok, és 1000 sosem elég. Ezt nagyon hangsúlyozzuk, mert tudjuk, hogy ha bármilyen drogot használunk, vagy egyiket a másikkal helyettesítjük, akkor újra felébresztjük függőségünket.
Požiūris į alkoholį kaip medžiagą kitokią nei narkotikai daugelį priklausomųjų atvedė prie atkryčio. Prieš tai, kai mes atėjome į NA, daugelis iš mūsų alkoholį atskirdavo nuo narkotikų. Bet mes nebegalime sau leisti klysti šiuo klausimu. Alkoholis yra narkotikas. Mes esame žmonės sergantis priklausomybės liga. Todėl norėdami sveikti privalome susilaikyti nuo bet kokių narkotikų.
私たちが手にできたものを維持していくためには、用心を怠ってはならない。一人一人の自由が12のステップによってもたらされているように、12の伝統はグループに自由をもたらす。
Notre bien commun devrait passer en premier. Le rétablissement personnel dépend de l'unité de Narcotiques Anonymes. Für den Sinn und Zweck unserer Gemeinschaft gibt es nur eine höchste Autorität, einen liebenden Gott, wie er sich in unserem Gruppengewissen zu erkennen gibt. Unsere Vertrauensleute sind nur betraute Dienerinnen und Diener. Sie herrschen nicht.
Единственным условием для членства в анонимных наркоманах является желание прекратить употребление. Anonimne narkomany.
Każda grupa powinna być niezależna we wszystkich sprawach, z wyjątkiem tych, które dotyczą innych grup lub na jako całości.
Katrai grupai ir tikai viens galvenais mērķis – nest vēsti par atveseļošanos atkarīgajam, kurš joprojām cieš.
Bir Narcotic Anonymous grubu herhangi bir ilgili kuruma veya dışında kalan girişime Narcotic Anonymous adına asla onay veya bu adı ödünç vermemeli. Bu ad ile maddi destekte bulunmamalıdır ki para, mülk ve prestij sorunları bizi öncelikli amacımızdan saptırmasın.
Tradisi 7, setiap kumpulan NA seharusnya mampu menampung diri sepenuhnya tanpa menerima apa-apa sumbangan dari luar.
Anonimni narkomani bi trebali zauvijek ostati neprofesionalni, iako naši uslužni centri mogu zapošljavati plaćene djelatnike.
परंपरा 9 NA जैसे है कभी संगठित नहीं होना चाहिए, लेकिन हम सेवा परिषद या समितियां निर्माण कर सकते हैं जो सीधे उनके प्रति उत्तरदायी होंगे जिनकी वो सेवा करते हैं.
10. erfðavenjan. Narcotics Anonymous hefur enga skoðun á utanaðkomandi málefnum. Þess vegna ætti aldrei að draga nafn NA-samtakana inn í almenn ágreiningsmál.
Tradisjon 10. Anonyme narkomane har ingen mening om utenforliggende spørsmål. Derfor bør NA-navnet aldri trekkes inn i offentlig strid.
Olá, o meu nome é Joaquim e sou adicto. 12ª tradição. O anonimato é o alicerce espiritual de todas as nossas tradições, lembrando-nos sempre a necessidade de colocar os princípios acima das personalidades. Obrigado. Mais 24.
Again, looking back on some of the material that was presented, the writing in the Rainbow Connection in October of 1980 of addicts around the world will have this book for comfort and for study. It just amazes me to see how many lives have been touched around the world because of the basic text. And this is, again, where we generally get the most enjoyment from our presentation, where we ask people to share what the basic text has meant to you. And again, if you're joining late, you can go to the basictexthistory.com, and there's a platform there for people to be able to submit their thoughts on this question, for you to be able to share with the fellowship what the basic text has meant to you. And Boyd and I want to extend our thanks to the committee that helped put this together, and the excellent job they did in creating the platform for us to be able to present this material and to share it with you. And we're deeply humbled and appreciative of the opportunity to participate in this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.